The Garage Sale is the 23rd episode of the second season of Everybody Loves Raymond. This is directed by Jeff Melman, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. I'll go through things chronologically, so there will be spoilers from now, and it actually starts off, I think, for the first time. I could be wrong about that, but certainly it's very rare for us to start with Marie and Frank. And Frank is reading the paper, and Marie doesn't want to hear it, she's not interested, but Frank very loudly tells her a story, and she turns to Frank in a kind of argument conversation and says, "Are you my cousin?" And Robert walks in at that point and he simply says, "That would explain a lot." Very fun way to start things off. After the intro, we're still in Marie and Frank's kitchen, and they're discussing the Hermansons' garage sale. And Frank decides that he can make more money than the Hermansons, so he decides they're going to have a yard sale. And we see Ray and Robert looking through some old childhood boxes, and Ray is finding all sorts of things that Marie has kept, and Robert can't find anything. And then they find a pair of shoes. And Marie comes down and says that she's going to get the area all set up so Frank can have his own little space, which is really nice and sweet. And then Robert asks about the shoes, and I didn't expect this, and I found this to be very funny, because it turns out that those were shoes that Marie was meant to give to Robert one Christmas, and she'd hidden them downstairs, but had forgotten about them. And Robert never even got them, which I thought was a little heartbreaking for Robert, but definitely very funny. We then go over to Debra and Ray's, and Debra is sorting out things to donate for the yard sale. They are getting a cut of the profits, and she's donating a bunch of baby items that the twins no longer need, and she's donating the cribs. And Ray says, well, he kind of explains that he didn't think they were done having children. They never really had that conversation, and I have to say, Debra's response made me laugh. As she was walking out the door, she replied, "Why don't we have 10 more and move into a shoe?" We then get to see the yard sale. I love how it's laid out. It looks very busy. It looks very cluttered, but in an organised way. There's a lot going on, but Frank seems to have a really good handle on it, and he seems to have organised things really well, and it's really impressive, and it's a side of Frank we don't get to see that often, but I guess he's very much driven by the money. Debra tries to make a joke out of things by trying to sell a bag of bibs for $1, and I'll be honest, I had to say that 3 times before I got that right. And this is when Ray starts to question more about whether they're having kids or not. And as Debra points out, this really isn't the right place for this conversation. It doesn't help that Marie overhears, and Debra walks off not having this conversation. And then Marie asks Ray what he meant by snip, 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 which I thought was, well, from my perspective, very funny. From Ray's, probably not so much. And we then hear from Frank that he's fixing things so that Marie can have her own little space downstairs. And the only thing I wish we got more out of from this episode is how that part of it turned out. I can't remember, back from the days when I used to binge watch this show, I can't remember if they turned the basement into anything. So I am keen to see if that happens, but I hope it does. Otherwise, I feel a little bit disappointed, because when Marie said she was fixing it up for Frank to have his space, and then Frank said the same for Marie, I was keen to see what would happen there, because that's so sweet of both of them, even though they both potentially have ulterior motives. And Marie then tells Debra that she actually wanted to have more children because she wanted a little girl, and she used to dress Robert up in a little pink dress. And then we're inside, and Ray and Robert are trying to take out this sofa bed. And Frank tells them it would be less heavy if you took the mattress off first. And on the one hand, that is probably true, but at the same time, sofa bed mattresses really don't weigh very much, unless it's a significantly expensive one, but it didn't necessarily look it. But nevertheless, they fold out the sofa bed, and I could see it coming before it happened, and yet I still found it to be fantastically funny. And this is the bit where the sofa bed crashes into the kitchen table and everything just tumbles off. It's very, very well done. And then Ray tries to talk about the kid thing with Robert, since Debra doesn't want to listen, and Robert gives some good advice, but maybe in an unhelpful way. In fact, he does say to Ray, "How much of a help are you really?" He's trying to suggest that if they have more kids, Ray is at work all day. He's only there in the evening, just when the kids are being put to bed, and he's not there for the tantrums during the day and not necessarily there for the sleepless nights. If he's up for work, I assume that Debra would do the night times, and Ray is not really thinking about that side of it. So I think Robert had a very valid point that Ray wasn't seeing the full picture of what Debra would experience, but he maybe could have said it a little bit more nicely. And Debra then comes in and she says quite clearly, I'm done having kids. And the timing isn't great because we also find out that a woman outside is trying to buy the crib, and Ray basically runs outside, I guess shocked from what Debra's just said, and he basically wrestles the crib away from the pregnant woman who needs the crib. And it's a funny scene, but it's kind of heartbreaking as well, because on the one hand it is comedic. We have a bunch of adults playing tug-of-war with a crib, but on the other, here we see Ray, who thought he might father more children and has basically just been told that that's never going to happen. And I feel like he's kind of reacting on impulse to the situation because he doesn't know how to handle this information. And I think it's a little bit emotional in that regard. And Ray screams, I want another baby, and then storms off, well, as fast as one can storm off while pushing a crib. And Debra goes to talk with him, and it's going well. Then Marie comes in and is slightly disturbed by the fact that Ray and Debra are on the sofa bed in her kitchen, bearing in mind they've just talked about having or not having children. I think Marie's response was very funny and a nice bit of comedy when we needed it most. And Debra and Ray do finally have a good discussion about this, and Debra reminds Ray of all of the disgusting times when people were sick and sneezing tuna over each other. And Ray realizes, yeah, I'm tired. We can't go through this again. And he goes out, and Debra inhales the baby clothes, and just as she's about to go and catch up with Ray, because maybe she's changed her mind, Robert comes scurrying out of the room, shouting for his mother, asking her if they had a secret sister. Clearly he's just found the photos of him in the little dress. And then we end with Don coming over to buy the sofa bed, and he lies down on it to try it out, and the whole thing collapses in on himself. And it's a very fun way to end what is generally a very fun episode, but I definitely think there are some more emotional aspects to this. It's not horrendously emotional. I didn't cry at any point, and I'm very easy to cry. But at the same time, I think it addresses some really important topics, and I think if any couple is watching this, most specifically a couple who have had children, if they haven't had that conversation about whether or not they've finished having children, I think it's definitely important to have that conversation. Even if the answer to the question is, I don't know if I want more children, I think it's important to at least have some kind of discussion so you know you're either on the same page or not on the same page. And I think it's a really brilliant episode. Very funny in a lot of places, very moving and meaningful in others. Aside from not seeing what happens with Marie or Frank's basement, and as I said, maybe we find that out in the future, I really, really can't remember. I feel like we must, but we probably don't at the same time. I don't know, I'm overthinking it. Either way, I thought that the garage sale, which I've only just realised shouldn't be called the garage sale because it's a yard sale. Granted, this started because the Hermansons were having a garage sale. But again, this is something else that I'm absolutely overthinking. Regardless of what we call the episode, it's brilliant and one that I really thoroughly enjoyed.